Queen Camilla didn't expect to see him again. Not after she buried the truth. Not after she got him dismissed. Not after she told everyone the guard had snapped. But 6 years later, in front of cameras, judges, and half the nation, he walked back into her life wearing the very uniform she tried to erase. And this time, he wasn't standing at attention. He was suing her for £100 million. Not for money, not for revenge, but for something far more dangerous to the monarchy. A record. Because what Sergeant Rhys Mallory revealed in court that day didn't just expose Camilla's lie. It threatened the crown itself. So before we show you what really happened when the Royal Guard broke his silence, make sure you're subscribed. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and get ready. Because what comes next? It's not ceremony, it's war. The Royal Courts of Justice looked different that morning. One side of the room held polished silk robes, military medals and pearl jewellery, representatives of the monarchy, palace advisors and foreign dignitaries in the gallery. The other side felt colder, leaner, less certain of itself. At the defence table sat Queen Camilla in a tailored navy suit, the right balance of royal elegance and civilian restraint. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, back straight, not touching the chair. A single sapphire brooch caught the courtroom lights. She looked bored, if anything. Across from her, seated alone at the claimant's table, was Sergeant Rhys Mallory. No legal wig, no solicitors flanking him. He didn't even glance toward the press gallery or the gold-embossed royal insignia above the judge's bench. He sat in full ceremonial dress, the red Coldstream tunic, crisp and creased, medals perfectly aligned, gloves folded on the table. His tall black bearskin hat rested beside them, not worn but present. His face looked older than most had expected, weathered. But his posture hadn't aged a day, perfectly upright, completely still. A man trained not just in war, but in waiting. What most people didn't know was that Sergeant Rhys Mallory had been more than just ceremonial. 2 tours in Afghanistan, a military cross for gallantry under fire, 30 years of unblemished service across 3 regiments before being handpicked for royal duties. The kind of soldier whose file read like a recruitment poster, until 6 years ago, when it was quietly buried beneath administrative language that made heroism disappear. In the public gallery behind him sat other guards, current ones mostly, who'd taken leave to be here, men who knew that if Mallory lost, speaking up about anything would become career suicide. If he won, it might crack open years of similar cases that had been handled quietly through palace channels. Some had their own stories. A Welsh guardsman who'd been transferred after questioning why a minor royal's drunk driving incident never made official reports. An Irish Guards corporal who'd been reassigned following a domestic violence call at a royal residence that somehow disappeared from police files. Men who'd served with honour until they witnessed something that made them uncomfortable, and learned that uncomfortable truths weren't welcome in royal service. When the clerk called the session to order, claimant Sergeant Rhys Mallory, defendant Her Majesty Queen Camilla, consort to King Charles III. A low murmur rolled through the public gallery. A former royal guard had taken the Queen Consort to court, not for protest, not for politics, for defamation, for £100 million. The figure wasn't random. Mallory's legal team had calculated it precisely. Lost pension contributions, destroyed earning potential, reputational damage across 6 years, and punitive damages that would send a message to any future royal who thought they could quietly destroy military careers without consequence. Mallory didn't flinch when the figure was read aloud. Camilla barely blinked. Only her jaw moved slightly as she turned to whisper something to her barrister. A few reporters caught it. Let him have his little stage. It's about pride, not truth. But this wasn't about pride. Legal experts had been tracking the case for months, knowing it could shatter centuries of royal immunity from civilian lawsuits. If Mallory won, every palace aide, every household staff member, every person who'd ever been quietly dismissed or transferred after crossing a royal could potentially follow suit. The monarchy was facing something it had never dealt with before, accountability through public courts rather than private palace justice. Palace insiders had spent weeks trying to prevent this moment. Offers had been made, quiet settlements, job recommendations, even hints at restoration to ceremonial duties if Mallery simply withdrew his claim. Each offer had been politely declined. Now, with cameras recording every moment and legal precedent hanging in the balance, they were fighting a war they'd never prepared for. She was wrong about that. The Crown still felt safe, though, and Rhys Mallory still hadn't said a single word. The judge's voice broke the tension first. "Sergeant Mallory," she said, leaning forward slightly from the bench, "we understand you are representing yourself in this matter. Do you wish to make an opening statement, or would you prefer to respond after the defence?" Mallery stood without hesitation. No dramatic pause, no fumbled notes. He didn't even glance at the Queen Consort, seated a few metres away. "I'll respond after the defence, Your Honour." His voice was firm, but not raised, not the kind of voice that filled a courtroom, the kind that made you lean in to hear it. The judge nodded, eyebrows lifted slightly at the man's composure. "Very well." The court clerk rose next and began reading the core of the claim, every syllable echoing louder than it should have in a room so quiet. The claimant alleges that statements made by the defendant, Queen Camilla, then Duchess of Cornwall, during and following a public disciplinary action, constituted knowing falsehoods, causing severe reputational and material damage, including premature dismissal from active duty, suspension of pension, and lasting character defamation. Whispers broke in the press gallery again. But what the cameras didn't know, what hadn't yet leaked into tabloids, was why this lawsuit existed. Why a royal guard, with 3 decades of silent service, had decided to go to war with the most protected woman in Britain. It had begun 6 years ago, almost to the day. During a late spring ceremonial event at Clarence House, Sergeant Rhys Mallory was assigned to the inner cordon, the closest post to the private entry used by members of the royal family. That day, Prince George and Princess Charlotte had been in attendance for a private family reception, one that was never publicly announced. Their security detail had been quietly doubled, but only the inner rotation of guards had been informed of the miners' presence. There had been a quiet briefing that morning, off the books, no printed copy, just a direct word from the platoon commander. 2 miners will be present. Unofficial, not announced, you're the closest post. Be smart. He didn't need the names. Everyone knew who the miners were. Mallery had watched the crowd in silence, tuning out the noise of footsteps and camera shutters. His vision moved in layers and faces, hands, angles, exits, movement patterns. Before the red tunic and palace postings, he'd worn desert camouflage in Afghanistan, where standing still meant staying alive. 2 deployments had taught him to read environments the way others read newspapers, and quickly, thoroughly, with understanding that missing details could have consequences beyond embarrassment. That's when he saw it. A man in his 40s, press badge tucked into a lanyard, but something about the lamination was off. His shoulders were angled, not toward the ceremony, but subtly toward the side entrance reserved for family. His eyes weren't scanning the ceremony. They were fixed on something deeper in the courtyard. Mallory's gaze shifted. Prince George, standing beside a household aide, had just turned slightly, away from the cameras, from his grandmother, and raised one hand near his chest. Palm out, thumb tucked in, fingers folded over, the universal distress signal, barely visible, easily mistaken, but unmistakable to those trained to see it. Mallery didn't think. He moved. He stepped out of formation, and not with alarm, not with force, but with surgical precision. A single pace offline, a hand to his belt, a short command into his mic. To the average tourist, it would have looked like a guardsman redirecting an enthusiastic onlook, nothing more. He approached the man with the press badge and murmured a simple line under his breath. "Badge ID, sir. Standard confirmation." The man froze. That was all it took? 2 plain-clothed security officers emerged instantly from behind the barrier. The man's hands were grabbed. Mallery stayed silent. Within seconds, the individual was removed from the crowd without a struggle. No weapons were drawn, no panic. The event continued without disruption. The royals, including George and Charlotte, were quietly escorted inside via an alternate route. The entire incident, start to finish, lasted less than 20 seconds. Mallory returned to his post. He resumed position. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He didn't even wipe the sweat now beginning to bead beneath his bearskin hat. Protocol had been maintained. The crowd never knew. Neither, apparently, did Queen Camilla, because that evening he was summoned, not by his commanding officer, not by the RMP, but by a palace attaché. And the first words spoken to him weren't "thank you." They were, "Her Majesty would like to know why you disgraced the guard." The reprimand didn't come through channels. It didn't bear an official seal or disciplinary heading. It arrived quietly, like a stain on a pressed uniform. Hard to see at first, but impossible to remove once noticed. 2 days after the incident, Sergeant Rhys Mallory received a summons to Wellington Barracks. Not to the office of his commanding officer, but to a side room, empty save for a staff captain with a file already open and a tone that didn't invite questions. "You're being rotated off ceremonial duty," the captain said, "effective immediately." No explanation, no charges, just silence. Mallerie didn't protest. He didn't need to. Not yet. At first, he assumed it was precautionary. After all, the man he intercepted had been quietly flagged by intelligence, escorted away and handed over to higher authorities. Surely there would be a review, a commendation even. But then came the memo, buried in an internal logbook, unsigned by any military superior, but attributed to Royal Liaison Recommendation. It read, "Sergeant Mallory demonstrated conduct inconsistent with ceremonial discipline. Intervened in civilian crowd without pre-cleared command authority. Broke formation in view of royal family. Action noted by Her Majesty the Queen Consort. Reassignment advised." That single paragraph would follow him like a shadow. The rumours began before the week was out, that he'd panicked during a routine watch, that he'd lunged at a tourist, that Queen Camilla herself had asked whether he was mentally fit to serve, that his pension file was being reviewed for instability. Mallory tried to contest it through formal complaint. The letter was returned, unopened, with the line, "This matter is considered closed." He wasn't demoted, that would have been too obvious. He was reassigned permanently. No further ceremonial roles, no state funerals, no royal weddings, not even palace security perimeters. From there, it was a slow suffocation, reduced to menial administrative work, then early retirement on partial pension. A legacy quietly erased, not with disgrace, but with the kind of bureaucratic silence that ensures no one asks questions. When word reached him that Camilla had later joked at a private garden party that some guards think the uniform gives them permission to play soldier, Mallory didn't react publicly. He just folded the newspaper and filed it. For 5 years he stayed silent, not because he lacked proof, but because no one wanted to see it. Until a single document changed everything. A clearance stamp, a declassification seal, and a line in black ink that would bring them both back to court. His actions directly prevented an attempt on the royal minors. Her Majesty acted entirely within her rights as Crown Consort. The voice came from the lead barrister seated beside Queen Camilla, an older man in Queen's Counsel robes, spectacles perched low on his nose, voice clipped with Oxbridge precision. He rose with studied grace, turned to the bench, and continued without glancing once at Rhys Mallory. In ceremonial institutions such as the Royal Guard, the chain of command flows not merely through military channels, but also through royal prerogative. It has been so for centuries. Her Majesty observed a clear breach of ceremonial protocol, responded accordingly, and referred the matter to palace officials. This was not defamation. It was discretion. He paused to let the words settle, as if centuries of tradition could be weaponized like a shield. "The claimant alleges reputational harm," the barrister went on. "But may I respectfully remind the court that the Royal Guard is not independent of royal oversight. Guards serve not at the leisure of Parliament, nor of military tribunal, but at the pleasure of the Crown." From her seat, Camilla allowed herself a faint smile. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her counsel was doing exactly what he was hired to do, reduce everything to hierarchy, strip the human cost from royal decisions, and frame her actions as dutiful management rather than personal interference. Furthermore, the barrister added, the record will show that no formal reprimand was issued by Her Majesty herself. The administrative actions taken against Sergeant Mallory were carried out by the appropriate military and palace authorities. Her Majesty merely expressed concern and is now being sued for £100 million on the basis of what? A conversation. He let that word hang in the air like a challenge. A single syllable meant to shame Mallory into silence. But the guard did not respond, not yet. The barrister flipped through a folder and pulled out a statement. We also submit into evidence remarks made by Her Majesty at a private garden event 2 days following the alleged incident. The claimant's legal brief claims defamation. But the full transcript reveals no mention of Sergeant Mallory by name. He read from the page, "What a shame, truly, when our royal traditions are undermined by those who forget they are meant to stand still and stay silent." A few soft chuckles drifted from the defence side, a quiet murmur of agreement. Palace aides nodded behind Camilla. Still, Mallory did not move. The barrister returned to his seat, smoothing his robes with the confidence of a man convinced the job was done. Camilla leaned toward him and whispered, this time loud enough for the microphones to catch it. 30 minutes. He'll be humiliated and gone. She believed it. So did half the courtroom. Because what could a dismissed soldier possibly do to the Queen Consort of England? The judge gave a small nod. Sergeant Mallory, the floor is yours. Rhys Mallory stood with the same steady composure he'd held since the morning began. No sigh, no throat clear, no dramatic rustle of papers. His movements were quiet, deliberate, measured like every ceremonial pivot he'd once performed before crowds of tourists and cameras outside Buckingham Palace. He stepped forward just far enough for his voice to carry. His hands remained behind his back, in the traditional at-ease posture of the guards, even in a courtroom. I won't waste the court's time arguing over royal protocol, he said calmly. Nor will I argue about prerogatives, traditions, or what's expected of those who wear red and stand still. He turned slightly, not to face Camilla, but to include the room. I'm not here for the money. I filed this lawsuit because truth was buried, and that truth, regardless of titles, regardless of uniforms, regardless of palaces, belongs to the public record. A quiet shift rolled through the room. No gasps, just the sound of silence becoming more intentional. Mallory's eyes landed on the judge. What happened that day has been twisted into a story of embarrassment, of protocol breached, of a guard who couldn't follow the rules, and every day since, I've had to watch as my service record, 30 years, was reduced to a footnote. My name turned into a cautionary tale whispered behind barrack doors, my file altered, my pension halved, my legacy dismantled to protect an image. He didn't raise his voice, but it seemed to grow anyway. I was loyal. I still am, but I won't be silent about what happened when that loyalty was punished. Camilla shifted in her chair for the first time. It wasn't much, but her fingertips tapped once against the bench, just enough to show irritation. Mallerie looked to the gallery, full of reporters, veterans, aides, even a few familiar faces from the household division, and spoke once more, slower this time. When we wear that uniform, we're taught not to speak. We're taught to stand still, and so I did, for years. I stood still while people rewrote what happened. I stood still while my name was smeared, and I stood still while Her Majesty sat at palace dinners and described guards like me as dangerous for doing exactly what I was trained to do. Now he looked at Camilla, not to provoke, but to confirm. She met his gaze, but her expression was unreadable. I am not here for vengeance. I am here for the record. He returned to his seat, and for the first time since court began, no one whispered, no one blinked. The silence felt earned, but Mallerie wasn't finished. Your Honour, he said, lifting a sealed envelope from the table beside him, I submit one document for review. Recently declassified by the Ministry of Defence, under provision of civilian legal disclosure. He handed it to the clerk with both hands. No flourish, no pause. Just formality followed by silence. The envelope was passed to the bench. The judge unfolded it carefully, scanning the letterhead first. Dark blue MOD crest, stamped into thick cream paper. A murmur ran through the press gallery as a few photographers angled for a better view. Mallerie remained standing, but said nothing. The document would speak louder than he could. The judge began reading aloud. This correspondence confirms that on the 14th of May, 2017, during ceremonial watch at Clarence House, Sergeant Rhys Mallory, Coldstream Guards, acted on visual threat indicators to intercept and identify a civilian suspect operating under false press credentials. She looked up briefly. No objection from the defence. Camilla sat motionless, lips pressed into a line. The judge continued. Said individual was later determined by MI5 and Royal Security Liaison to possess unauthorised recordings of minor royals, unregistered surveillance equipment, and tactical information concerning movement of protected royal family members. Intent deemed credible and hostile. Now the murmurs were audible. Due to Sergeant Mallory's actions, potential breach of security protocol involving royal minors was contained without civilian panic, public exposure, or operational compromise. Surveillance footage was suppressed to avoid diplomatic incident. Sergeant Mallory's conduct is recognised by this office as having directly prevented an attempt on the royal minors and fulfilled the obligations of ceremonial duty and active protection. The judge placed the document flat on the bench and looked to the defence table. Her Majesty was briefed on this incident in confidence, Mallerie added quietly, 4 days later. He didn't need to elaborate, because if she knew the truth then, and still let the punishment stand, the implications extended far beyond wounded pride. In the gallery, reporters stopped scribbling and simply stared. The silence in the courtroom was no longer awkward. It was radioactive. Camilla shifted, her elbow brushing against her lead barrister. Her face hadn't changed, but her fingers were now linked tighter than before, one knuckle white at the joint. Mallerie turned back to the judge. For 6 years, that document sat behind clearance codes. I couldn't speak of it. I was bound. But the moment it was unsealed, I filed this claim, not for revenge, but to put truth back on the record. He returned to his seat, slowly, deliberately. The courtroom did not breathe. The judge tapped the declassified letter once, as if confirming its physicality. Then she looked toward Camilla and said evenly, "Your Majesty, do you wish to respond to this evidence?" Camilla blinked, once, and then she spoke. Queen Camilla stood slowly, not with the poise of a monarch addressing the Commonwealth or opening Parliament, but with the stiff composure of someone cornered, calculating her next move in front of an audience she no longer controlled. Her barrister remained seated, eyes fixed on the bench. This wasn't in the strategy brief. "Your Honour," Camilla began, her voice tight but steady, "may I clarify something before this is further distorted?" The judge gave a brief nod. Camilla clasped her hands together, fingertips tight. "No one disputes Sergeant Mallory's service. No one questions his loyalty. But ceremonial duty is not improvisational theatre. He broke protocol, and whether that protocol was inconvenient or not, he broke it." She turned slightly, facing the gallery, a subtle performance for the press. When the public sees a guardsman move, it ripples far beyond the crowd. We're talking about global footage, headlines, narratives we cannot control. Her voice was gathering strength now, slipping back into well-practiced cadence. "And yes, I was informed about the incident, but I was also told that Sergeant Mallory acted without authorization, without communication to superiors, and in a way that created uncertainty among those present. For a guard, that's not bravery, it's chaos in uniform." The room absorbed her words in stony silence. Mallerie remained still, eyes forward. Camilla gestured lightly in his direction. "I do not make personnel decisions, I express concern. If others acted beyond that, it was their prerogative." But the edges were fraying now. Her voice had hardened. The room could hear it, not defiance but defence. That's when Mallerie finally spoke. From his seat, quiet, even, inevitable. "I chose my oath to the children over your comfort." The sentence dropped into the courtroom like a gavel. The room didn't gasp. It froze. Camilla's eyes flicked toward him just for a second, not with fury, why, with recognition. She knew what he meant. She remembered the look on George's face that day. She'd ignored it then. She couldn't ignore it now. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Your Majesty," she said, voice clipped but calm, "I remind you that testimony before this court is sworn." If any briefing occurred, acknowledging the threat Sergeant Mallory neutralised, and if disciplinary actions followed, despite knowledge of that threat, this court considers such decisions relevant and material to this case. Camilla opened her mouth, then stopped. She hadn't lied, not directly, but truth left out, under oath, had a weight all its own. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom, from the judge to the last reporter in the back row, could feel it. The Queen Consort wasn't just being questioned, she was being watched. Before Camilla could respond, a voice broke the silence, not from the bench, not from the barristers, but from the public gallery. "Your Honour," the woman said, standing slowly from the second row. Her voice was soft, but it carried, in part because no one else dared speak. The judge turned. "State your name." "Eleanor Drayton, former Assistant Private Secretary to the Queen Consort, 2016 to 2019. Camilla didn't turn around, but her shoulders stiffened just barely. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You were not listed as a witness." "I wasn't called," Eleanor said, her voice steadier now, "but I was there. And I believe this court deserves clarity." The judge hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Approach." As Eleanor stepped toward the front, reporters leaned forward as one. Pens paused, lenses refocused. A former palace aide breaking silence in court was not just rare, it was seismic. Standing now in full view of Camilla, Eleanor spoke with the careful cadence of someone who'd spent years mastering discretion. 4 days after the Clarence House incident, I was present during a closed-door meeting between Her Majesty, a senior palace press advisor, and 2 members of the household division. She glanced toward Mallerie, then back to the judge. During that meeting, the security briefing was summarised. Her Majesty was informed that Sergeant Mallory had prevented a probable breach involving the young royals. It was confirmed to her that the suspect's credentials were forged and that MI5 had taken the matter into private review. "And what was her response?" the judge asked, tone perfectly neutral. Eleanor hesitated for only a moment. Then she said, and I quote, "That may be, but the public must never see guards act like loose cannons. We can't afford men in red acting like cowboys, not with cameras watching." Camilla inhaled sharply through her nose, but said nothing. Eleanor continued. "When one of the advisers suggested a quiet commendation might be in order, Her Majesty replied, 'No, this must be buried,' quietly. The optics come first. The room went utterly still. No papers moved, no keys tapped. Even the Queen's Counsel looked away, as if shielding himself from the words. The judge's gavel came down once, softly. "Miss Drayton, you may return to your seat." Eleanor did not look back at Camilla as she walked away. The Queen Consort sat frozen, lips parted slightly, as if caught mid-thought, or mid-lie. Rhys Mallory remained perfectly still, but his eyes, just briefly, flicked toward Eleanor in the gallery. Not gratitude, just acknowledgement. The truth had been spoken. The judge exhaled through her nose, fingers steepled just beneath her chin. "Given the late addition of new testimony and the presence of sensitive material, I will defer ruling until a full review has been completed. A written judgment will be issued in due course. This session is adjourned." The gavel tapped once, not loud, not theatrical, just final. But no one moved, not at first. It wasn't the kind of courtroom moment that ended in cheers or tears. It was quieter than that. Stranger, like watching a monument shift. Something you didn't expect to move, suddenly moved. Camilla remained seated as her counsel gathered documents with rushed efficiency. Her brooch caught the light again as she leaned slightly forward, but her gaze never lifted. The weight of the testimony, of the document, of Eleanor Drayton's quiet voice repeating, "The optics come first," seemed to press down on her shoulders all at once. She said nothing. No glance toward the press, no final word for the judge. Just a slow, measured rise and a swift exit through the side door, flanked by aides who knew better than to speak. Outside, the world waited, but inside, the narrative had already shifted. Across the aisle, Rhys Mallory stood. He took his time gathering his gloves and bearskin hat. He didn't look rushed, didn't check the gallery. When he finally stepped out from behind the claimant's table, he did so without ceremony, just the quiet grace of a man whose truth had finally been heard. Reporters swarmed the corridor before he even reached the steps. "Sergeant Mallory! Will you be pressing criminal charges? Do you expect the Queen Consort to apologise? Is £100 million the real goal here, or is it symbolic?" He stopped halfway down the stone steps of the Royal Courts of Justice, turned to face the press. Just one sentence. "The crown belongs to the people, not to those who fear the truth." Then he descended the final steps, stepped into a waiting black cab, and was gone before the shutters even stopped clicking. Now let me ask you something. Do you think Queen Camilla should be held accountable for what she did behind palace doors? Was Sergeant Mallory right to take her to court? Or should he have stayed silent to protect the image of the monarchy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story changed how you see those guards standing outside the gates, hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, and share this video with someone who still thinks it's just ceremony. Because tomorrow, we've got another story that'll change how you see everything. Watch the next one on your screen now. Same time, same place. See you there.